Previously we saw that the whole group went into the double dungeon, where they found a huge door. Upon opening it they discovered an ancient temple. Inside the temple they saw huge stone statues. Jin Wu was reading the laws written on the slate carried by the winged statue, when suddenly he felt someone tug his arm. It was Ju-hee. Complexion was incredibly poor. Song Jinwoo was deeply taken aback by this sight. Jinwoo asked Ju-hee,
"What's wrong? Are you ill somewhere?"
Ju-hee replied in a trembled voice.
There, over there.
Jinwoo's eyes followed Ju-hee's trembling pointing finger. She was pointing at the giant god statue. More specifically, she was pointing at the god statue's face.
The eyes! The eyes of the god statue moved towards us. Just now.
Huh. Right, you must be mistaken.
Jinwoo looked again several times, but nothing seemed to have changed. There was no visible change to the god statue.
Hey. I'm sure you've made a mistake.
However, it seemed like Ju-hee didn't hear him. Her head stayed lowered, and as she held onto Jinwoo's arm, her entire body trembled even harder.
Hang on a sec here.
Even Jinwoo picked up on this strange but ominous sensation now. The world was eerily quiet. So much so, it felt just too bizarre.
Worship the god. Second law, exalt the god. Third law, prove your piety. Those who do not keep to these laws shall not leave this place alive.
It was then. Everyone was jolted back to their senses at the sudden explosion of noise.
What was that? Where did that sudden noise come from?
The first person to notice the change in the situation was none other than Jinwoo. Because his senses were running at full tilt already, he could tell where the noise was coming from right away.
The door. The door is closed.
As soon as Jinwoo shouted out, everyone shifted their gazes towards the doorway. The door they left open was now firmly shut close. God damn it! I can't stand this. The hunter who was the first to oppose the idea of continued exploration of the dungeon began spitting out cusses as he took large strides towards the door. I'm going home, so you all can have fun with a boss or treasures or whatever. That hunter glared at Song with an expression that contained all of his dissatisfaction before he spun his head around and angrily grabbed the door handle. It happened, then. Song's eyes grew extra large.
No!
Shouted Song. The area above the hunter's neck suddenly vanished. The headless body powerlessly collapsed to the ground. Hunters began screaming their heads off. The stone statue that smashed a human's head apart with a steel mace returned to its original spot next to the door, as if nothing important had happened, its body completely covered in fresh blood. Mr. Park started to freak out as he shouted.
That thing can move? What the hell? Does that mean every statue in here can move too? We gotta fight against these things?
Unlike others here, though, Jinwoo knew the truth. We then see Jinwoo recalling everything that ever happened to him. Jinwoo then started to have memories of his past encounters.
This isn't the first time I encountered a near-death experience. During my first raid, I accidentally broke away from my party and got lost. I also got hit by an E-rank monster in the back and was hospitalized for weeks. I even almost starved to death after being trapped inside a dungeon. Even though they were all low-rank dungeons, I had to put my life on the line. Others trade their magical cores for better weapons to defeat stronger monsters and to earn more treasures.
We then see Jinwoo remembering his sick mother, who was in the hospital at the time, and that how he can't trade his magical cores for weapons and equipment. Because if he did that he would not be able to pay for his mother's medical expenses. After that we see him recalling all the bad-mouthing that he had faced to this point. We see him recall the rumors of him being the world's weakest hunter. Jinwoo then says,
all those days where I came out injured, I ignored their sneering remarks and inefficiently worked a job that could result in my death. Maybe it was because of this, that I knew very well. Their troubles only had just begun. Didn't Ju-hee say it earlier?
Jinwoo then started to recall the words of Ju-hee a moment ago, the eyes. The eyes of the god statue moved towards us. Just now.
If what she said is true.
A chill rapidly ran down his spine. Jin Wu forced his stiff neck to turn around so he could look behind him. The stone statue of the god was looking down at him. It was then, the god statue's two black eyes changed to red. Was this the instincts of a hunter? No, the instincts of a living being were sending out urgent warning signals. Something was coming. Something none of them could contend with. Jin Wu turned towards the other hunters and cried out as loudly as he could.
Get down!
Almost at the same time, red beams of light shot out from the eyes of the god statue. Jin Wu hugged Juhui and threw their bodies to the floor. The beam shot right by the spot Jin Wu had been standing. 1/10 of a second. No, he survived by 1/100th of a second. That was definitely too close for comfort. Unfortunately, not everyone was as lucky as Jin Wu. Those who were swallowed up by the red light evaporated where they stood. Only the ashes of what used to be human hunters remained where the beam flew past. The screams came not from the dead hunters, but those who witnessed their final moments from the sidelines, actually. I barely made it because he told me to get down. If it wasn't for Mr. Song's shouts. Hunters stared at Jin Wu while nervously swallowing their saliva. Jin Wu turned out to be their unlikely savior. Without his timely warning, they could only imagine what would have happened to them, and that thought sent chills down their spines. While still lying prostrate on the ground, Jin Wu glared at the god statue. Its eyes were still glowing in red, but it did not attack again. Jin Wu looked underneath him. The scared silly Juhui was trembling in his arms. This was the reason why she worked for the association and not for a big guild, and participated in simple raids like this one, even though she was nominally an excellent hunter with a rank as high as B. Juhui's breathing was getting rougher by the second. He couldn't let her be like this. He had to do something. Jin Wu was about to raise his body up, thinking that he gotta do something here, but then, someone grabbed his shoulders and pushed him back down, hard.
Don't get up.
It was Mr. Song, somehow next to the youth before anyone had noticed it. Jin Wu was flustered, but still did as he was told. Song then shouted at the other hunters.
Nobody move! Stay exactly where you are!
Song looked around before focusing on Jin Wu. Only those that moved got killed. Those who listened to you and got down survived. Song tilted his head slightly.
I thought you warned us because you figured something out.
No, well, I just felt something dangerous was coming, so.
Just as Song stared at Jin Wu with a rueful expression, Jin Wu too found a little bit of leeway to check out the older hunter's condition. And the youth's eyes opened up wider after finding something pretty terrible.
Your arm?
This is nothing. I can still hold on.
Jin Wu swallowed down his saliva. Song's other hand that wasn't pressing down on Jin Wu's shoulder, his left arm, was gone. Song studied Juhui's conditions for a bit, before he took off the t-shirt he was wearing, and while not even showing the enormous amount of pain he must be feeling, he wrapped up what was left of his left arm.
Help me tie up the end, please. It's difficult to sew with only one hand.
Jin Wu could only nod his head then. They were able to somehow stop the bleeding for now. If Song's suspicion was correct, then the moment they moved, they'd get attacked. And, even if they got lucky and managed to evade the beams and reach the door, there were the two stone statues guarding the doorway to worry about, as well. They were a big problem too, actually. The movements of the doorkeepers were so fast that he couldn't see it with his eyes. Could he or anyone else open the door and escape before those statues attacked them? It sounded completely impossible. It was then.
Don't move!
Song shouted at Mr. Ju, who was at the far end of the group. Shut up. Who knows when that thing will start attacking us again? But you want me to stay here and wait? Mr. Ju was a close combat type hunter. These types of hunters possessed far superior physical abilities than regular human beings. On top of this, Ju was about to sign up with a big guild after his skills were acknowledged by them not too long ago as well. I'll not die here today. While keeping low to the ground, Ju put all his strength down to his legs. His aim was at the doorway. The muscles on his legs were swelling up fast. Right then, Ju kicked the ground and exploded forward. Meanwhile, Jinwoo hurriedly turned his head to look at the god statue. Just as he suspected, the eyes of the statue were fixed on the back of Mr. Ju. And then, the chilling red ray shot out from those eyes. The female hunter screamed at the top of her lungs. She must have developed a leak, because a puddle of yellow liquid formed where she was squatting on the ground. The expressions of the hunters froze, hard. Mr. Ju no longer stood where the red beam flew past. Only the pair of ownerless ankles could be seen now. Jin Woo's expression also crumpled as well. As expected, the god statue could easily finish them off if it felt like it. It'd be easier than stepping on squirming bugs, actually. If that's the case, then why hadn't it? It could kill them, yet it hadn't done that. This was a completely different pattern of behavior compared to the monsters that attacked as soon as spotting human hunters in their vicinity. After witnessing this, Jinwoo thought. These statues only moved if certain conditions were met, the doorkeepers that only attacked if someone approached the door, the eyes of the god statue firing that red beam if someone moved. It was like a game with a set regulation. It was here that a piece of puzzle found its place in Jinwoo's head. He began recalling the contents of the stone slate Song was reading not too long ago. That was why.
The laws of the Karutanon Temple, was it? Regulation was rules, and rules could be laws as well.
The key to their safe escape from this chamber had to be buried within those warnings found on the stone slate.
Worship the god.
That was the first law. Song shifted his gaze back to Jinwoo. Instead of a reply, Jinwoo simply placed his index finger on his lips. It was a sign asking for a bit of time to think.
If my thoughts are right.
Jinwoo slowly rose up. Song hurriedly tried to stop the youth, but Jinwoo shook his head while carrying a determined expression.
Doesn't look like he gave up on living.
Song nodded his head. Jinwoo kept his eyes trained squarely at the god statue and carefully stood up. Almost right away, the eyes of the statue were fixed on Jinwoo. And as expected, the red beam was fired in his direction. If he got down to the ground a moment slower, it'd be his face melting away, instead of a few strands of hair on top of his head. He nearly died just then. The moment the statue's eyes met his, he thought he was going to die for sure. He somehow did dodge it, but his legs wouldn't stop shaking from the fear. Still, he learned something important just now. It's not attacking someone who's moving around. As long as he was squatting low to the ground, he could go anywhere he wanted to and the statue's eyes would remain still. However, if one stood up, then the red beam would be fired without hesitation. That was why Jinwoo bet his life on proving this theory right just now. And now, he was sure of it. The meaning behind the first law, that was. Jinwoo shouted out towards the rest of the hunters.
Everyone.
Their attention shifted towards him in an instant. Jinwoo spoke as he met their gazes.
You must bow down towards the god statue.
Hunters began tilting their heads after hearing him. You want us to bow down to that statue? Hunters exchanged glances with each other, before loudly cussing out at Jinwoo. What the hell? How can you say something like that under the current circumstances? Have you lost your mind, Song Jinwoo? Kim's face became boiling red as he began snorting like a bull. I had no idea you, Mr. Song, would be like this. If I could move, then I'd have punched you in the face already. Jinwoo bit on his lower lip. 6 of their comrades were killed by the god statue. So, it was rather obvious that the surviving hunters would cuss him out when he told them to bow down towards that abominable thing. It wasn't hard to understand what these hunters were feeling at the moment. And, the most important thing was, he had no logical evidence to back his theory up. He only had his gut feelings. Indeed, that was the only way to describe it. However,
I'll do as you say.
That voice came from Jinwoo's back. Everyone's eyes immediately shifted there. It was Mr. Song, effectively the leader of this group. You are going to bow down to that fucking statue? Just as other hunters began to freak out, Song looked straight at Jinwoo.
Young man, you've discovered something, haven't you?
Jinwoo resolutely nodded his head.
Is it your instinct again?
Yes. For the time being.
I see.
Just now, 11 people survived thanks to Jin Woo's instincts. Well, with the death of Mr. Ju, there were 10 now, but still, if it was Jin Woo's instincts, then wouldn't it be worth believing it at least once more? That's what Song thought. When Song knelt down and bowed towards the god statue, the mood had become solemn and silent. He's really doing it. Seizing upon this opportunity, Jin Wu shouted out once more.
Everyone, I beg of you. Please kneel before the god statue. We might be able to get out of here alive.
The impact those simple words carried was quite explosive. We might live. We can get out of here. With just one bow down. The hesitant hunters began to plop down to the ground, as if they were really bowing. The number of them performing the act gradually increased. In the end, even the complaining Kim bowed his head towards the statue. However, there was no visible change to the god statue. Indeed, those chilling red light still shone from the eyes of the statue. Jin Wu felt his heart go cold. It was here that his gaze shifted to Juhui next to him. No matter how generous one was, it was difficult to describe her posture of squatting on the ground shivering, while holding her head in her hands. There was only one person remaining now. And that would be him. Jin Wu knelt down towards the god statue, placed his hands on the ground, and slowly lowered his head. Finally, something began to change. Hunters who had noticed the change first raised their voices. The god statue. Look at the statue. Jin Wu belatedly raised his head and spat out a sigh of relief. Just as he suspected, this chamber operated strictly within the set regulations.
If that's the case.
Then, this game was far from over. 2 more laws still remained. The second law, exalt the god. And the third law, prove one's piety. It was then. Accompanied by a goosebump-inducing noise, the entire chamber began to shake. Jin Woo's expression hardened immediately.
As I thought.
His suspicions proved to be correct once more. Things were only getting started. The humongous god statue was slowly rising up from the stone throne. Hunters were hugging each other while shedding tears of joy until then, but when they realized this turn of events, they all froze up like statues themselves. Soon, the god statue completely stood up from the throne. The creature swept its gaze around once, and began walking towards the hunters. Every time the god statue stepped on the ground, the whole world seemed to shake. It was so tall that its head was almost scraping against the chamber's indescribably high ceiling. Even when the hunters were overwhelmed by the statue's sheer size, the thing was gradually closing its distance to them. Mr. Song. Mr. Song Jin Wu. The hunters who were cussing at Jin Wu only a short while ago hurriedly began crowding around him. Is there a way out of this? Say something. All these adults were forming tearful expressions as if they'd start breaking down in sobs and wails very soon. Currently, Jin Wu was their only hope. Jin Wu helped the frozen stiff Juhui up from the ground and began talking about the second law.
Exalt the god. That's the key.
Wait, isn't that?
Kim suddenly butted in as if he knew something others didn't.
Isn't that what's written on the slate?
Correct. Worship the god. Exalt the god. And finally, prove your piety. We need to satisfy all 3 laws.
Jin Wu began speaking faster and faster. Why? The god statue was already a stone's throw away from them. Everyone's complexion paled as the gigantic shadow loomed over them. Let me try something. A young male hunter who usually kept to himself suddenly took a step forward.
I've been in a church choir. I'm confident if it's about exalting something.
The young hunter slowly stepped forward towards the statue while disregarding the dissuasion of Kim. He regulated his breathing while looking up at the god statue before he took a large gulp of air.
I come to you, Lord.
His clear voice began reverberating within the chamber.
Renew my faith once more. Bless me with your grace, Lord.
The statue stopped its march in front of the singing hunter. Hunters began gasping out in elation. The god statue didn't move from the spot as if it was absorbed by the singing. All the other noises in the room vanished. Only the young man's voice could be heard in the chamber's interior. The young hunter was encouraged by this and carried on.
All the weakness found in me. Through your love, I shall overcome.
Among the hunters, only Jin Wu was shuddering from this ominous sensation filling him up.
This is wrong.
Jin Wu swallowed up his words several times. The chamber featured its own set of rules. But the young hunter was exalting the god statue with the rule of Christianity, not with the rules of this chamber. Thankfully, the statue wasn't moving, but could singing that him qualify as upholding the rules? Jin Wu shook his head. The only reason why he didn't say anything was solely because he couldn't think of a better way to stop the god statue himself. It was right then. The weighty noise reverberated throughout the chamber. The female hunter screamed at the top of her lungs. When the stone statue lifted its leg up, bloody mess of what used to be the young hunter could be found on the ground as well as on the bottom of its foot. Other hunters began screaming in panic and shock, too. Hunters dispersed away from the statue in a hurry. Unfortunately for the female hunter, she lost her reasoning and stood on the spot while screaming loudly after personally witnessing the death of the young male hunter. Jinwoo was running away while carrying Juhui in his arms, but he turned around so he could go and help that woman out. But then, Song stopped the youth.
It's too late.
As if slapping a fly down, the god statue slammed its palm down at the female hunter. The statue was not walking around anymore. No, it was actually running around and stepping on the humans it found nearby. Whenever the thing stepped on the ground, the entire chamber shook around, hard. Jinwoo gritted his teeth and began running again. Juhui squeezed her eyes shut and held onto him for her dear life. Thinking that moving around together was dangerous, Jinwoo and Song ran in separate directions. Jinwoo made sure to run towards the furthest corner from the frenzied god statue. However, there was another hunter who had arrived there before he did. It was Mr. Park. Park was running with everything he had. Back home, a son who resembled him so much and a wife pregnant with their second child was waiting for him. He couldn't die here, not like this. Perhaps because he ran with everything he had, he was able to run the furthest away from the statue out of everyone here. As Park tried to control his heavy breathing in the corner, his friend Kim urgently shouted at him.
Mr. Park.
Park raised his head after hearing the familiar voice. Kim pointed at the spot behind Park and cried out.
You're back. Look behind you.
It was then, something sharp gleamed coldly behind Mr. Park. Park was sliced in half from the top of his head right down to his groin. His cleanly cut two halves fell to the ground. The stone statue that killed Park with its greatsword returned to its position as if nothing had happened, exactly like how the doorkeeper did before. Kim began tearing up after witnessing this scene. Behind him, the humongous god statue was stepping on and killing humans one at a time, and if you ran towards the corner in order to avoid it, then the stone statues located there would start attacking you. His legs were getting heavier. His breathing was getting rougher and rougher. However, his head was filled with only one chain of thought.
Exalt the god. Exalt the god. Exalt the god.
The words of the second law circulated in his brain non-stop. The key to unraveling this mystery definitely existed within this chamber. Something within this chamber that they could use. However, when the hunters first entered this place, they had searched every nook and cranny, but didn't find a single contraption nor things that might be some kind of tools. No, back then or now, the only things here that can move are the stone statues. It was then. A thought raced past Jinwoo's brain just then.
Only things moving in here are the statues?
Jinwoo's eyes widened.
Why haven't I thought of that before?
If the only things that could move were the stone statues, then the only thing he could use had to be them, too. These statues activated when humans got near them, meaning he had to take advantage of this rule. Even though he was running short of breath, Jinwoo roared out loud enough to shake the entire chamber.
Run towards the statues holding musical instruments.
All the hunters still alive heard Jinwoo's voice. A ray of hope found its way into the eyes of the hunters. Quite different to back when he told them to bow down, everyone moved unbelievably quickly. If Jinwoo was wrong about this, then as soon as arriving near one, they would be killed by the stone statues holding the musical instruments. However, no one here questioned Jinwoo's words. Song was the first one to arrive in front of a statue carrying a musical instrument. Song controlled his heavy breathing and raised his head to look at the statue. And as if it was a lie, the fingers of the statue moved and strummed on the harp. A beautiful melody flowed out. It's working. Hurry to the statues with instruments. Hunters ran towards the nearest correct statues in hurried footsteps. While sensing the approach of his physical limit, Kim somehow arrived in front of the statue that held a bazooka and plopped down to the ground. As soon as the statue began playing the instrument, the god statue stopped chasing after Kim. He must have been overcome with emotions, because Kim then began shedding tears while he stayed down on his knees. Meanwhile, the god statue turned around. The creature searched around and soon enough, found its next prey.
God damn it.
Jin Wu spat out a cuss as his gaze met the god statues. To watch what happens next, continue to watch along the series and subscribe so you don't miss the next video. If you enjoyed the video, press the like button and comment your feedback. See you in the next video.